It is my pleasure to introduce the moderator for tonight's debate, Dr. Daniel Esquino, the president of Mount Wachusett Community College. Since arriving at Mount Wachusett College in 1987, Dr. Esquino has focused his efforts on improving curriculum, community outreach, and economic development. When he came to the campus, it had one campus and 1,800 students. It now has 12,000 students in 4 campuses, one of which is right here on Devon's. Pardon me, now 5 campuses. Dr. Esquino instructs graduate and undergraduate courses in public human resource management and public financial management at Roger Williams University. He is a well-qualified moderator. Would you welcome, please, Dr. Daniel Esquino.
Thank you. And if you can't hear me, let me know, and I'll try to get close.
Pledge of Allegiance. Can you wait?
Wait. Yeah, we're going to get to that. Thank you. I'd like to first introduce the panelists, and they're over here on my right. And we have Chris Gamere, State House Bureau Chief for Son of Lowell, Sentinel and Enterprise of Fitchburg, and Neshoba Publications. Marissa Donlan, City Editor of the Sentinel and Enterprise of Fitchburg, and Bill Cole, New England Bureau Chief of the Associated Press, who is based in Boston. And our timekeeper this evening is Jim Campanini, Editor of the Sun. I hope you all can hear that. I hope, more importantly, I guess, for this debate, I can hear that. I would now like to introduce the candidates and thank them very much for serving and for running and making our democracy work. What's happening this evening is very important for the life of our democracy. First, U.S. Representative Niki Tsongas, Democrat incumbent of Massachusetts 3rd Congressional District, and Republican challenger Jim Golnik, a businessman from Carlisle.
Dr. Esquino, it's John Golnik. John Golnik.
Oh, Golnik. What did I say?
John.
Okay.
That's okay. Just don't call me too early in the morning.
You don't know what time I get up, I get. I'd like to have you all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Two requests. First, that you turn off your cell phones so they will not be a distraction for the candidates and other members in the audience. And second, that you withhold your exuberance. I know that you want to applause at periodic times, so let's hold that applause until the end of the session. And thank you for that. Let me tell you a little bit about the format for this evening's debate. The debate is scheduled to last a little over 1 hour, 1 hour and 15 minutes. The panelists will ask questions for 1 hour, and then the last 15 minutes will be dedicated to having each candidate ask one question of the other candidate, after which we will have 2-minute closings from each candidate. During the 1 hour segment, questions will be rotated to each candidate. The candidate who first receives a question will have up to 90 seconds to respond. The rival will get 1 minute to rebut. The person who got the original question will have 30 seconds to close out, and then we will move to the next question and the next candidate. The first question will now be asked by Marissa Donlan, and she will ask that question of
John Golnik.
Mr. Golnik.
Thank you, sir.
Marissa.
This is on? There?
Oh, there you go.
This is a 2-part question to Mr. Golnik. Are the people in your district better off today than they were 2 years ago? Why or why not? And if you don't believe that things are better, what is your plan to change that?
Thank you very much for the question, Marissa, and thank you for everyone who's turned out here tonight. Thank you very much to the Neshoba Valley Chamber of Commerce, the Lowell Sun, and thank you to Representative Tsongas for taking time to come here tonight to have this discussion that, as the doctor mentioned, is very important. Can you hear me? How's that? Can you hear me now? Sorry. Are the people of our district better off than they were 2 years ago? And I think the answer to that question is that no, they are not. We've seen the middle class under siege. We have gas prices that have more than doubled. We've had food prices that have gone up by 25 to 30%. We've seen home values decline where the majority of middle class families' net worth resides in. People are not better off than they were 2 years ago. We've got unemployment rates in this district that are chronically high, some approaching 50%, in some cases higher than 50%, higher than the state average. The public sector does not create sustainable jobs. I'm a practical guy. If this worked, I would jump in with both my feet and agree. All we need to do is look at the stimulus package. It's been $800 billion to create or save 3.5 million jobs at a cost of $225,000 per job. If we were to actually just give the $225,000 per job per person, Representative Tsongas would want to raise their taxes right now because they're being rich. So we are not better off. I actually think we need to give more visibility. We need to give certainty to small business because that's where the jobs are created. Lower the corporate tax rate from 35% to 25%. Let's extend the tax cuts for everyone permanently. We can't be raising taxes on anyone, and more importantly, we can't be raising the taxes on small businesses who are the creators of the jobs that are sustainable. I think we need to repeal the Affordable Care Act. This is a job killer. 2.3% excise tax is killing these businesses in our district. Thank you.
And the 60-second rebuttal, Congresswoman.
Well, I want to thank the Chamber and thank the Lowell Sun for hosting this debate. And to answer your question, Marissa, I absolutely believe people are better off. Let's look where they were in the last in the last month of the Bush administration. We were losing 800,000 jobs. Last month, we gained 130,000 jobs. We've had 31 consecutive months of private sector job growth. And that is a result of the recovery package. Mr. Golnik says that it gives a cost per job, and he's wrong. He's wrong. 1/3 of the stimulus was a tax cut, one of the largest tax cuts in the history of this country that went into the hands of the middle class. Another third of it was money that went back to the states to absorb the free fall that their budgets were experiencing. So are we better off? Absolutely, with an unemployment number of 7.8%. We are on a path. But is there more to do? You bet there's more to do. And as we've in the last 2 years not had a single comprehensive job bill come to the floor, I focused on my district.
30 seconds, Mr. Golnik.
I completely disagree with that, Representative Tsongas. I think it's great that the unemployment rate has dropped to 7.8%, but let's look behind these numbers. We're continuing to see this unemployment rate fall because people are dropping out of the workforce. In a country that's constantly growing with legal immigration and young people entering the workforce, we would expect people participating in the workforce to be increasing. It has not increased. In fact, if you were to take the same number of people that were working 4 years ago and calculate the unemployment rate today with that same number of people, our unemployment rate would be at 10.7%. And if you were to include the people, the U6 number of people who have dropped out of dropped out of the workplace because they're frustrated, it would be 15%. People are not better off than they were.
All right, next question from Mr. Khmer, and it goes to Congresswoman Tsongas.
Thank you. An issue that has taken center stage in this election is how to rewrite the U.S. tax code. I'd like to hear what the Niki Tsongas and John Golnik tax plans are, and why your plan is the best approach for the American people.
Well, I believe that first and foremost, the most important tax issue we confront is whether or not to extend the Bush tax cuts. And I firmly believe that we need to extend the tax cuts for 98% of Americans. The middle class has been so hard hit as a result of the great downturn. We've seen the growing income gap. Very important that we leave these dollars in the hands of the middle class. I do not support extending the tax cuts for the highest income of earners. And as we address taxation, I think it's very important. My opponent has taken a pledge. He has taken the Grover Norquist pledge, and in no instance would he consider raising revenue. And we know as we confront a debt and a deficit that have accumulated over many, many years, the product of two wars that were not spent for, tax cuts that were not offset with decreased spending in any instance, and very important pharmaceutical drug coverage for seniors, but again, one that was not paid for, a squandering of the Clinton surplus. We confront an extraordinary challenge, and it's going to require three branches to the stool as we figure out how to address it. We have to look at ways to bring revenue in. Letting the 2% tax for the 2% of Americans lapse is one way to do it. We end the subsidies for big oil and big gas. There was a time when they needed them. They don't need them now.
Thank you. Mr. Golnik, 60 seconds.
Representative Tsongas talks a lot about a balanced approach towards deficit reduction. That's a shell game. A balanced approach is we raise taxes now and we put off spending cuts till later. We don't have a revenue problem in this country. We have a spending problem. The 2% that Representative Senator Tsongas is talking about will generate $70 billion a year in additional income. It's not going to be a windfall. And as a matter of fact, when juxtaposed against the $1.2 trillion deficit, it cuts that deficit by about 5%. The total income for the 2% is approximately $1 trillion a year. Now, if Representative Tsongas would like to raise their taxes to 100% of that, that wouldn't even begin to balance our budget. We do not have a spending problem in this country. We do not have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. I say cut the corporate tax rate from 35% to 25%. Broaden the tax base. Don't give credit to people who move their companies overseas and let them take a tax cut. Let's close that loophole and let's bring these jobs back to this country by giving credit to companies who bring their businesses back to this place. Let's extend the Bush tax cuts permanently because we don't raise taxes on small business creators who create the jobs.
30 seconds, Congressman.
We do have a spending problem, and let me tell you who has been doing the spending. The two wars that were unpaid for that I referenced, the tax cuts, the Bush tax cuts that were not offset, the pharmaceutical drug coverage that was not paid for, the squandering of the Clinton surplus, so that when we hit an extraordinary challenge to our economy, there was nothing in the national nest egg. That is the spending problem we have. And as we talk about how to address it going forward, letting the Bush tax cuts for the top 2% of Americans lapse would generate $800 billion over 10 years. We're confronting what we call sequestration. We have to come up with $1.2 trillion. Those $800 billion would go a long way to addressing it.
The next question from Mr. Cole to Mr. Golnik.
So back to jobs. Jobs are, the number one issue in every congressional election around the country this year. And there are pockets of this district where the unemployment rate is significantly higher than the statewide average. So what specific measures would you undertake to grow jobs?
Thank you very much for the question. Again, I'll repeat what I was stating earlier. The private sector is where the most sustainable jobs are created. The stimulus package did not create or save 3.5 million jobs that were sustainable. Our unemployment rate was over 8% for 44 months and counting. The private sector where the sustainable jobs are created, the private sector has $2 trillion on their balance sheet right now. But they're not investing their money to innovate. They're not investing their money to create jobs. And why? Because there is no certainty. We have tax risk, we have regulatory risk, and we have political risk. Nothing is getting done down in Washington, D.C. Again, let's cut the corporate tax rate from 35% to 25% for businesses. 35% is the highest corporate tax rate in the world. Let's broaden the tax base and close some of these loopholes. Again, the loophole that businesses are allowed to deduct their moving expenses for moving their operations overseas. Let's close that loophole. Let's give credit to the companies that move their operations back. Businesses move overseas because there's a favorable tax environment. The regulatory environment, Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, call it what you will. 2.3% medical device 2.3% medical device excise tax. Representative Tsongas voted for in the Affordable Care Act. 3 businesses reside in our district, and that's costing them $100 million a year. Boston Scientific has already moved innovation offshore to Ireland and will be moving more to China. It hasn't worked, and we need to give clarity to these small businesses.
Congresswoman Tsongas, 60 seconds.
Thank you for that question, and you're right, we have some communities that have been extraordinarily hard hit, and one of them is Lawrence, Massachusetts, which is home to actually two very robust manufacturing companies, and we did a Make It in America town hall there to learn from them what we could do to help them stay here. They've made decisions at the top to do that, but they fight again, over and over again, all the incentives, for example, in our tax code that make it easier to go offshore rather than stay here. So we have to change our tax code to reward companies who stay here. I introduced a piece of legislation called the Hires Act that recognizes that some cities are disproportionately hard hit, and it would be a grant program that would put people to work investing in their communities. I also have worked on the ground. One of the very important roles of a member of Congress is to be engaged, to bring resources. And we learned about a company in Lawrence. It was going to go to North Carolina. We got engaged. We helped them work with the state and local government. That company is now staying here, about to break ground and add new jobs. In Lowell, Massachusetts, we have an important economic development project that we've been very successful in advancing.
And Mr. Golnik, final rebuttal on this question.
Representative Tsongas, if all of these things that we talk about would improve the unemployment rate in our district, it wouldn't be so high in the old mill cities in our district. We have a real problem in these, and I'll get right back to that 2.3% medical device excise tax. I don't know how you could have voted for the Affordable Care Act that was going to place 2.3% medical device excise tax on 3 large employers in this district. It astounds me. And to be quite honest with you, the tax is not even on profits. The tax are on gross revenues. So if you have $5 million in revenues from selling a medical device, even if it took $10 million to innovate and create that, you're still paying a 2.3% tax on the $5 million of your gross revenue.
Can I address that, Dr. Sweeney?
If we have one final rebuttal, go ahead.
I don't think Mr. Golnik knows that when given the opportunity to vote on a standalone piece of legislation, I voted against the medical device tax. And as it first came up, was very concerned about its impact on small, innovative medical device companies. I am a champion of innovation in this district. I have worked very closely with the Small Business Innovation Research Group that focuses very much on money that exists across the federal government, across federal agencies to fund innovation. It is critically important to this state and to the 3rd district, and I understood the impact on the medical device industry. But I wasn't going to throw out the baby with the bathwater, and I wasn't going to vote down the Affordable Care Act that holds such promise for Americans across this country, for bringing down the cost of health care, for creating access, and addressing some of the egregious insurance practices. So I wasn't going to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but I guess Mr. Golnik doesn't know that I had a chance to vote against that tax in a standalone bill, and I did.
Mr. Golnik?
Representative Tsongas, you voted for the bill before you voted against it. And at the end of the day, that was no more than a symbolic vote that didn't stand a chance in the U.S. Senate. The Affordable Care Act is a job killer. You say you're concerned about the middle class. The CBO just came out last week with a report that there were going to be 8 million people that were going to be hit with a $1,200 tax. 80% of these people, 80% make $56,000 or less a year. So I'm sorry, Representative Tsongas, I know you say you're looking out for the middle class, but you're burying the middle class with your votes in Congress, with raising their taxes and increasing their cost of living.
All right, let's take the next question somehow. I think we'll get back to this issue during the course of the next hour. Next question from Ms. Donnelly to Congressman Tsongas.
On your website, you tout your vote in support of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act and its $69 billion investment in clean energy. Yet, as we unfortunately have seen here in Devens, government-backed energy solutions like evergreen solar, are not always viable. How can you guarantee voters that their tax dollars will be spent wisely when it comes to alternative energy and reducing this country's dependence on foreign oil?
That's a great question, and the challenge of energy is a great one. I'm on the Natural Resources Committee, one of the committees of the House of Representatives that oversees our federal lands. I'm also a founding member of the Sustainable Energy and Environment Coalition because I believe the challenge of climate change is one of the greatest generational issues we face. It's also a national security security issue, our dependence on foreign oil, and it's an economic issue because, as we know, we have an opportunity to lead the innovation in all the alternative and renewable energy sources. The program you referenced and the funding that went into the Department of Energy, only 3 of those companies have failed out of the dozens of companies that have received grants as a result of a competitive process. But I strongly support tax credits, the production wind tax credit, the solar tax credit. I have seen what they can do. I visited a mill in Lawrence, Massachusetts. It's now empty. The owner wants to fill it with robust businesses, but she wants to control her energy costs. And as a result of the solar tax credit that exists at the federal level and the state level, she was able to bring in a gentleman who funded putting solar panels on a roof that was 2 acres. I said, how big is this? It is 2 acres. While doing that, it also supports a manufacturer in Lawrence that happens to be the dominant manufacturer of the inverter. They take the energy out of the panels and take it to the grid. It's a win-win-win situation. We have to be engaged.
And 60-second rebuttal, Mr. Golnik.
I believe in the opportunity that green energy represents. I think it would be a fantastic investment opportunities. I think it can create jobs. However, we need to stop the subsidies to green energy. These have failed. We are spending taxpayer dollars to fund companies that are not viable. If these companies were viable, they'd be able to raise money to fund themselves in the private sector, and they can't. So where do they go? They go to the federal government to use our tax dollars, and it hasn't worked. And on top of that, it's too expensive. Representative talks about generating energy. Generation of 1 megawatt of electricity by natural gas costs about $50. Generation of wind for 1 megawatt of energy costs about $80. Solar costs anywhere from $300 to $455. Who suffers from paying these higher prices? The lower and middle classes. And it causes inflation because you know what? It's going to cost more money to run energy, air conditioning, heat, etc., refrigeration, and the companies that sell food. So the only thing green about green energy is the money, the taxpayer dollars that we're throwing at this.
Congresswoman Tsongas.
Well, I think the example that I cited is a real example of a public-private partnership where there is a recognized need in this country to develop alternative energy sources to compete with China of this world. We don't want to lose the innovation game to a country that is invested, where the government is heavily investing. And then you see the benefit that accrues to the private sector, whether it's in the reduced cost to an owner of a mill who wants to then pass those reduced costs on to her new tenants, or whether it's in supporting a local manufacturer. And it was the private sector who actually provided the financing as a result of the tax credits at the federal and state level that made it possible.
Thank you. And we'll take the next question. Before doing that, I'd like to thank the candidates for your discipline in keeping within the time frame, more or less.
Thank you.
That was a compliment. And the next question from Mr. Gamia to Mr. Golnik.
Thank you. Mr. Golnik, you've made it clear that one of your top priorities is to repeal the Federal Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare. But you've also said that you support elements of the law, such as requiring insurers to cover pre-existing conditions and allowing young adults to remain on their parents' health insurance plans to the age of 26. So my question is, if Obamacare is repealed, do you have a plan to ensure that the parts of the bill that you like remain in place?
Thank you very much for the question. I don't believe you can keep pieces of the Affordable Care Act and still make it function. One piece is based on the other. So I do support the full repeal of the Affordable Care Act. What I have said is that I believe that we have the best health care in the world. Unfortunately, it's also the most expensive. And what we need to do is we need to lower costs. The Affordable Care Act has done nothing to lower costs. Anyone in here who's had to pay a deductible or a premium has seen their insurance go up. And as a matter of fact, it's job killing. We've talked about the issues of that with the 2.3% medical device tax. I say we can do a couple things. Let's try to lower costs of our health care. Let's do this by introducing market-driven reforms. Let's allow people to buy insurance across state lines. That'll force insurance companies to compete for our business by lowering the premiums and still maintaining the quality of care. Let's have substantive tort reform, $54 billion over 10 years. But the real savings will come when doctors don't have to practice defensive medicine. And with regard to people with pre-existing conditions, I think we can fix that. I think we should allow people, pre-existing conditions, people with small companies, people who are also just individuals, to pool together so they can approach the insurance companies and have the buying power that a large company will have. As a matter of fact, if we can take it a step further and put these small pools under the HIPAA regulations in 1996, which prohibits anyone from denying someone insurance if they have a pre-existing condition. So these are some of the things that I think we can do.
Congresswoman Tsongas?
Well, I don't believe the Accountable Care Act is a job-killing piece of legislation. All you have to do is look at the Massachusetts model. We created the template. It's a template that's been adopted at the federal level, and we have one of the lowest unemployment rates in the country. So obviously, bringing in the Massachusetts health reform was not a job-killing piece of legislation, nor do I believe it will be at the federal level. If you pool together everybody who has a pre-existing conditions, can you imagine the cost of insurance? It's the reason that you have a situation in which you try to bring everybody in, those who are healthy as well as those who have already been diagnosed with very serious or whatever illness, ones that we know will be more costly, is to bring the cost down. If you pool everybody from the has a pre-existing condition, it will be exorbitant, and no matter how many people you put in it. And to address the issue of across state lines, this is selling insurance. Insurance is regulated at the state level. The Accountable Care Act actually provides an opportunity for states to come together and figure out ways in which they at the state level can figure out how to sell insurance across state lines. It's an effort not to take away that fundamental right of insurance companies, of a state to regulate insurance companies. But what we're really talking about is repealing all the extraordinary advantages that have been done. It protects Medicare and adds 8 years of life. It creates access for millions of Americans.
Thank you. When I was talking about pooling, I was talking about people with pre-existing conditions, but also people who have small businesses with employees who don't have pre-existing conditions. So letting all these people pool together to diversify their risk. The Affordable Care Act, while Representative Tsongas says it was modeled after the health care reform here in Massachusetts, make no mistake about it, this plan was a plan that was a state solution for a state problem. It wasn't meant to be applied across the country. And it has done one thing: it has not lowered cost at all, and it won't lower costs. And until we lower costs, we're going to have an intractable problem in health care. I will say this, Representative Tsongas, it's not going to protect Medicare. Did you say Medicare? I'm sorry, Representative.
I did.
It's not going to protect Medicare, which in your vote for this bill, you voted to take $716 billion out of a program that seniors have paid into to fund a program that they aren't going to have a part of. Now, you could say that's going to get rid of fraud, but it's also going to cut down on reimbursements to doctors, reimbursements to nursing homes, reimbursements to hospitals. I mean, you tried to scare seniors in the last election that I was going to take this away from them. You have materially changed Medicare by pulling $750 billion out of Medicare. And the medical reimbursements is a serious issue for people because doctors, hospitals, and nursing homes simply won't see them.
Can I address that issue?
We'll do this one more time.
The assertion that the $700 billion weakens Medicare has been proven by multiple Pulitzer Prize-winning newspapers to be not true. The reality is the $700 billion is diverted to add benefits in Medicare. Medicare is a guaranteed set of benefits for every enrollee. And this adds benefits. It eliminates a copay for preventative health measures. It closes the donut hole, and it adds 8 years of life to Medicare. It strengthens Medicare and adds benefits for every enrollee. Multiple newspapers have said that any other suggestion is not the case.
Mr. Golnik, that was 60 seconds.
Representative Tsongas, it cuts reimbursements to doctors, hospitals, and nursing homes, and that's going to allow doctors, hospitals, and nursing homes who are already not accepting Medicare patients to not accept more. At the end of the day, what we need to do is we need to bring healthcare costs under control by market-driven reforms, and once we do that, we can really get down to the business of solving the problem that we have with Medicare.
Important issues. And the next question, the sixth question, comes from Mr. Cole to Congresswoman Tsongas.
So defense spending is a budget buster, but it's also bread and butter to the thousands of families whose livelihoods are linked to Devens and Hanscom Air Force Base. How will you approach military spending at a time when the federal budget is strained and the United States faces few military threats?
Well, I am a product of the military. My father survived Pearl Harbor, went on to serve for 20 years in the Air Force. I grew up on Air Force bases across this country and the world, and as I come to Devens, it always harkens back a little as I come into a base. I sort of feel what it was like to live on those bases. And I am a member of the House Armed Services Committee. I sought that out because this district is home to many companies that do work for the Defense Department. So I understand the bread and butter issues. I understand that we have a remarkable military. It has served with great distinction, that whatever we do, we cannot compromise the readiness of our soldiers, nor the national security of our country. But we face an extraordinary challenge, and even former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Mike Mullen, said that one of the greatest challenges we face is not dealing with our debt and deficit. I voted for the Budget Control Act. The Budget Control Act put in place almost $900 billion worth of cuts, half of which come out of the Defense Department. And all the Joint Chiefs, the Chiefs of Staff, have all agreed that this is absorbable. We also confront something called sequestration, in which another $600 billion will come out of the Defense Department. This is not acceptable. It will weaken us in ways that are not supportable. So the challenge we have going forward is how to address the threat of sequestration in a way that is reasonable, fair, and balanced. Does ask the military to absorb some more cuts, not nowhere near the $600 billion that sequestration would put in place. But I also understand the BRAC process and how important Hanscom and Devens and Lincoln Labs and Natick soldier systems are to not only to this state, but also to the technological advances that they constantly produce. Natick Soldier Systems has worked with me on the issue of body armor. I'm a proponent of lightweight body armor. We need to make sure they're still there.
Mr. Golnik.
Thank you very much. I actually do think we face considerable threats in the world today. I think the world is very unstable, and I've always said time and again that security at home begins with security abroad. I think that there are a number of failed states out there that present us with challenges because I think that these are where our enemies can hide and where certain weapons of mass destruction can be exported. So I look in terms of countries like Iran, I look at Somalia, I look at Yemen, I look at North Korea. So I do think it is an unsafe world, and I'm a big believer in making sure that we maintain a strong military. I do think there are areas we can cut, and I apologize to any civilian contractors that are in the room right now, but that's probably the first place I would look in the Defense Department. I would certainly look, the GAO did an audit of 1/3 of our budget and found $600 billion in savings. If we are concerned, we probably should audit every department in our government and try to find out where savings can be had. But I'm a strong believer in security at home begins with security abroad. That doesn't mean I want to commit troops. It does mean that we are a world leader and we need to be vigilant.
Congressman?
Well, I think as we draw down our wars, we've drawn down the war in Iraq. I'm supportive of bringing our soldiers home. I'm grateful for the President's timetable. I think we could move more quickly. It's costing us $300 million a day, $9 billion a month, and we've put untold sums into training Afghan National Security Forces, Afghan National Police. I think it's now time to call on them to defend their own country, bring our soldiers home, and divert those dollars, whether it's back into the Defense Department to meet the needs that we know we will confront around this globe, or to address other challenges that we most certainly have, not the least of which is education.
Thank you. And we will move on to the next question, and that will be from Ms. Donovan to Mr. Golnik.
Okay. Thank you for the segue, Representative. This question is to education. America's children are falling further and further behind students in other nations when it comes to academic aptitude. Families, especially low-income families, have few or no options to move their children from underperforming and failing schools. And while the federal stimulus supported teachers' jobs, that funding is finite. What role, if any, should the federal government play in giving American students access to an education that will prepare them to compete in the global economy?
Thank you very much. I believe believe that the single biggest investment that we can make are in our students. They're human capital. I don't believe we should abolish the education department like we hear some people talk about sometimes, because we need to remember that 35% of the Department of Education's budget goes towards the managing of funding for low-income students, Pell Grants, of which I was one. And without a Pell Grant, I wouldn't have gotten through school. I do believe that No Child Left Behind has not worked. I do believe that we should devolve a lot of the decision-making about education back to the states. I think Massachusetts educators know what's best for Massachusetts students. And I don't think we should be sending $1 down to Washington, D.C. to have a bureaucrat tell us how to educate and teach our students here in Massachusetts and give us 70 cents back. So I believe we should devolve more of the decision-making process and spending process back to the states. And again, I would not abolish the Department of Education, because they play a very large role in funding low-income students like myself when I was in school, and I couldn't simply have gotten through school without it.
Congressman Tsongas?
Well, I've spent some time in the classroom, and I also was fortunate to work at Middlesex Community College, rising to becoming a dean over the course of 9 years. So I understand how critically important our teachers are and how critically important our educational institutions, especially our public educational institutions. As I have served in this office, I've made it a point of visiting a lot of companies. And one company I visited, and actually a company in the new part of the district, 800 out of the 1,200 employees were engineers. Also, as we did our Make It in America town hall, we learned that at the other end of the spectrum, there's a need for very particular skills that can support advanced manufacturing. Those skills can actually be taught at the vocational technical schools. So what that tells me is we have to focus on education across the spectrum. And we in Massachusetts are fortunate. We are the topmost in the country. The fact that we have as low an unemployment rate as we do is probably reflective of the fact that we value minds, we support innovation, and we know that we need educated young people either to have the skill set at the advanced manufacturing level all the way up.
Mr. Golnik?
Thank you very much. Well, I have to disagree with the representative. I don't think our unemployment rate is that low. In fact, we have many cities in this district that are approaching 9%. Lawrence is 14.5% unemployment. Children today coming out of school, or they're children, but students are 1 and 2 are unemployed. I mean, we have not done the job creating jobs for people who have been working for years, but also those entering the workforce. And we need to do this again by empowering the private sector. We need to give clarity to the private sector so that they'll begin creating jobs and start spending some of that $2 trillion on their balance sheets. So our single biggest disservice that we're doing right now is not creating the jobs that these students need coming out of college.
Thank you. And the next question from Mr. Gamere to Congresswoman Tsongas.
Thank you. I'd like to get your positions on Social Security. With the fund running toward depletion, there have been many proposals to preserve it, including investing contributors' funds into private accounts and also increasing the retirement age. What is your position on those or other proposals to sustain Social Security?
Well, as I travel the 3rd District, I meet many seniors for whom Social Security is the dominant, if not altogether, very often the only source of retirement income. So how we treat Social Security is critically important. And I oppose privatization of it because it would essentially destabilize the system. Years ago, 1983, President Reagan, Tip O'Neill, then Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill, worked off of recommendations made by a commission and put in place a plan that acknowledged the long-term challenge to Social Security. Those of us baby boomers who are now approaching the age where we are eligible, the age of retirement the age of eligibility has moved up to 67. I do not support adding additional years. There are many people in this district who have worked very hard all their lives, often at very challenging physical work, who would never see the benefit of Social Security if we raise the age. But I do think it's structurally sound for a number of years. We know we have time to deal with this. I think that a commission can come forward with a whole host of recommendations, and we'll find an approach that protects the essential promise of Social Security, does not privatize it, does not destabilize it.
Mr. Golnik?
Thank you. Social Security is not structurally sound. I know the President thinks that as well, and it simply isn't. You can't be sending out more money and taking in less and have anything be solvent. Now, I was attacked last time by Representative Tsongas because she said I wanted to privatize Social Security. And even in Representative Tsongas' answer, I didn't hear any solutions to a problem, and it is an intractable problem. And what I have said in the past is that we need to look at any and all possibilities to try to save this, because if we do not tackle the problem of Social Security, it is going to tackle us. And it's going to take a bipartisan effort, not by someone who votes 95% of the time with the leadership of her party. Now, I have said in the past, and I still believe this, that we should give new people entering the workforce, the option. I don't believe in mandates, Representative Tsongas. I don't believe in forcing anybody to do anything. Give them the option to invest a small percentage of their savings in private investment accounts. Will this be a hit to the budget at first? Of course it will. But by simply kicking the can down the road, and whenever you're given the opportunity, Representative Tsongas, to talk about what you do, kicking the can down the road isn't an option any longer. And to attack people who come up with ideas, look, the only thing that I'm not going to agree to with regard to Social Security is the status quo, which is what you agree with.
Congressman Tsongas?
Well, Mr. Golnik, 2 years ago, when the Ryan budget first came out, which included privatizing Social Security and voucherizing Medicare, said, and I quote, that Mr. Ryan's budget was fantastic. So I think that Mr. Golnik has taken a position strongly in support of privatizing. The reality is that I am one out of, there were 100 members of us who signed a letter to the super committee asking it to think big, that our real challenge is $4 trillion and that we need to look at all legs of the stool, how we grow our economy, how we bring in new revenue, and how we embrace and think carefully about those parts of our federal budget which aren't very important. I voted for the Budget Control Act. That's a down payment on the side in which we look at reducing the cost of government. But as we go forward, I certainly have not and cannot support a pledge in which you say absolutely one leg of the stool is out of the question. It ends up you need to go up to Washington and you become part of the problem.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Representative Tsongas, I said it was fantastic because it was a good starting point. And again, in your rebut I didn't hear any solutions on how we're going to fix this problem. I've heard you coming after me and attacking me and telling me that I want to privatize Social Security. I am ready to have a discussion on what we can do to try to save Social Security. And kicking the can down the road, the status quo, simply isn't an option. It puts our seniors at risk, and it's just unacceptable to me. And look, good ideas know no party affiliation. I will be willing to listen to anyone and everyone with a good idea to try to help solve the problem that we face with Social Security. Thank you.
And you have 30 seconds, the same 30 seconds.
I don't think it's a good idea to embrace a pledge that says in no instance will I ever consider revenue as part of a way forward in which we address the challenge of our debt and deficit. If you do not include some form of revenue, whether it's eliminating oil and gas subsidies for entities that no longer need it, whether it's letting the tax cuts for those in this country who've done so darn well but whose help we need right now, if you make a pledge that in no instance will any revenue be part of the discussion, then you inevitably lead to a situation in which you balance the budget on the backs of middle-income Americans.
Thank you, both of you. And the next question, this is question number 9. My intention is to ask around 12 questions and to move on to us having the candidates ask questions to one another in the closing statement. So question number 9 comes from Mr. Cole to Mr. Golnik.
Okay, so another good segue into what I'm going to ask. Massachusetts voters are notoriously independent and they suffer political gridlock very poorly. Each of you has been painted as quite partisan, towing the party line on most issues. Can you tell us where you see common ground and how you'll work with colleagues across the aisle to get things done in Washington?
Thank you very much. You know, I like to believe that my campaign, I always tell people, is a dress rehearsal for the type of legislator you'll be. And I think if anyone who's watched my campaigns, both in 2010 and 2012, can certainly say that I've reached out to groups of people that were Republicans don't typically reach out to. I have been endorsed by unions. I have been endorsed by community groups. I spend a lot of time in towns where most Republicans will say to me, why are you going to these towns? There are no Republican votes there. And my answer to them is very simple. I'm going there because there's never going to be Republicans there if they don't see one. So I spend an awful lot of time doing this. And as I said earlier, look, I recognize that there's a lot of partisanship. I recognize that things aren't getting done. I think that people see from my campaign that I reach out to groups. I try to get things done. I'm not going down to Washington, D.C. to get nothing done. I can tell you this, I'm not going to vote 95% of my party, 95% of the time with the leadership of my party. If I wanted Representative Pelosi to be my representative, I'd move to California. So honestly, I think we can do better. I think I will certainly look at any idea that comes across my desk when I'm down there, whether it's from a Republican, a Democrat, or an independent. But we need to get working again.
Congresswoman Tsongas.
Well, I know that in every instance, I think one of the fundamental responsibilities we all have is to think through every vote and to take the vote that we think is in the best interest of our constituents and of our country. And I have done that in every instance. But despite the gridlock that you referenced, I've had a lot of success working across the aisle. Working on the House Armed Services Committee, I learned about the great challenge of sexual assault in the military. And working with Congressman Mike Turner, a Republican from Ohio, we crafted a bill, Defense Strong, that works to change the culture of the military and make it easier for victims to get the redress and justice that they need. I learned about body armor, the challenge of heavy body armor. It does a good job protecting, but it's also harmful because it's so heavy. And again, working with Republican colleagues, now this year the President has tripled the funding for research and development. I learned about the small business companies that we have throughout this district that I've talked about. Highly innovative, many of them in the Defense Department, but clean energy companies, biopharmaceutical companies, all benefit from this research and development program within the federal government. Working on a bipartisan basis, we got this bill reauthorized last year so that it will be in place for the next 6 years. And just recently, the Natural Resources Committee voted out, came to the floor of the House, a modest piece of legislation, but one that's really important to the city of Lowell. It allows for a land transfer between the park and the city so that a major economic development project can move forward. I think I have a demonstrative record of working on a bipartisan basis.
Mr. Golnik.
Thank you very much. Representative Tsongas, I do applaud your work with sexual assault in the military and body armor. I think that's a good thing. But I will say this, your voting record is from the Washington Post, no less, which isn't necessarily Republican friendly, states that you vote 95% of the time with the leadership of your party. And I think that stands by itself.
Well, the one issue where I did not vote with the leadership, among many others, is on the medical device tax, because Speaker Pelosi was not in favor of repealing the medical device tax.
And that you voted for that before you voted against it, and it was a bill that was going nowhere and largely
Come
symbolic.
on, take it.
Okay.
I don't know what that means.
We will move on to the next question from Ms. Donaldson to Congresswoman Tsongas.
Much has been made of Mitt Romney's statement that even though he likes Big Bird, he will end federal subsidies to PBS, the public television network that broadcasts Sesame Street. Do you think the federal government should financially support public television, radio, and the arts? Please explain why or why not.
Well, I have a very benign soft spot in my heart for Big Bird, I have to tell you, and Snuffleupagus and everybody else. No, I think I am a supporter of public funding for television, for NPR, and the arts. I have spent many years in Lowell, Massachusetts, where art is the handmaid of human good, and the role of arts and culture has been very, very important to that city's advancement. And I've seen that in other cities of the Merrimack Valley. I see it in Haverhill, I see it in Lawrence, I see it in Fitchburg that has a remarkable art museum, I see it in Gardner, and obviously it needs and generates and struggles to generate all the private funding that is necessary to run remarkable arts organizations, remarkable theaters, and all those things that add tremendous value to our communities. But I do think there's a modest role for the federal government to play.
Thank you. Look, we certainly have a spending problem in this country today, and no one can deny that, not when we have trillion-dollar deficits 4 years straight and we have our debt load increasing by 50% in over 4 years. I can't speak to BBS. I don't know if I would continue funding it or not. We do need to look at every and all spending that goes on in this government right now, in the federal government, and try to find out ways to make sure that we live within our means. People in this country have been asked to do more with less, and the federal government needs to do the same.
Congresswoman Tsongas.
I think it's a great return for a very modest investment, and we know that really the larger challenges are on all these extraordinary issues. The Budget Control Act made a down payment on moving forward on addressing the debt and the deficit, but as we move forward, we also have to focus on how we grow our economy, we invest in our people, we invest in our communities, and we also include revenue so that it's a balanced, fair approach that is sustainable over time.
Thank you. Next question from Mr. Premier to Mr. Golnik.
I'd like to hear your thoughts on what the appropriate level of financial regulation is. Some believe Congress has not done enough to prevent another financial crisis or more bailouts. Others argue Congress has put too many restrictions on financial institutions. What is the right amount of financial regulation, and why is your plan the best approach?
Thank you very much, Chris. I'm not a laissez-faire capitalist. I recognize the need for regulation, but one thing that we do know about regulation is that it increased the cost of doing business. And that increase in cost of doing business isn't born on the backs of businesses on their own. It's passed down to the working men and women of this district, of this state, and of this country. Now, we can take a look at the Sarbanes-Oxley financial regulatory bill that has 40 sections for rulemaking, but I think it's best to look at the Dodd-Frank bill, which has 400 sections to make rules from. Now, look, to be quite honest with you, I don't think anybody here who used to have free checking and now doesn't have it can see the effects of the financial reform bill. It hasn't worked, and you can look at the J.P. Morgan situation this summer with the $6 billion trade that happened. The federal government cannot regulate bad behavior. Bad behavior regulation starts with good corporate oversight and good governance in the corporation. I personally think that the financial crisis was driven off derivatives. And I've said time and time again that this could be a one-page bill. Derivatives are good when they're used to hedge your risk and manage your risk with an asset. When they're used to be traded as assets themselves, that's when troubles start. So you cannot buy an option, being a call, a put, a straddle, if in fact you are not using to hedge an underlying debt instrument or equity.
Congresswoman Tsongas.
Well, I think we have to understand the value of regulation. Coming out of the extraordinary challenge from the Wild West that took place in Wall Street, how important it was for this country to address that so Americans would never again have to go through a financial crisis of that scale. And on a more modest level, if we watch all the discussion we're having today about meningitis, because of the failure of our government to adequately oversee and regulate a discrete part of the pharmaceutical sector, they're two different things. But what they do say is there is a role for the federal government in a regulatory environment, whether it's in Wall Street, whether it's making sure we have safe drugs and safe toys and clean air and clean water. Even Scott Brown understood that the Wall Street crisis called for a response. And we've seen the benefits of that. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is now up and running, has already had some great successes. One is some of the credit card companies are overcharging. There's money going back to customers.
Ms. Golnik.
The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau comes under the purview of the Federal Reserve but has no accountability to them and has no accountability to Congress. It's creating a huge bureaucracy that's going to implement regulations that are going to increase cost of doing business that are going to be passed down, again, to the working men and women of this district, of this state, and of this country. And again, I think that the challenges that we face, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and Dodd-Frank did not prevent almost another problem with J.P. Chase this summer with a $6 billion outtrade. So it hasn't worked. I just completely disagree with that. What it has done is increase the costs for the middle class. Once again, the middle class doesn't have free checking. Can you imagine 30,000 pages of rules and regulations that could come out of this Consumer Financial Protection Bureau? How is a small regional bank even going to be able to fit compliance with that?
Well, I disagree with Mr. Golnik. Scott Brown disagrees with Golnik. I imagine Elizabeth Warren disagrees with with Mr. Golnik, but we have seen the pluses of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau already, as it is addressing some of the excesses in the credit card industry, as it has produced a one-page explanation of very complicated mortgage instruments, so customers, consumers know what they're signing onto, and actually they're starting to look at the credit rating agencies, and I filed a law that is in some modest way influenced the fact that they are now making sure that customers have access to the credit rating agency scoring on all of their, up to the 3 different agencies that exist.
So you see, Representative Tsongas, all Republicans aren't the same, and we don't agree on everything.
Dr. Squino, there's 7 minutes left in this segment.
And that will just about take care of the next question, question number 12. And I thought we'd get to question number 12. So that's pretty good on my part. And that is from Mr. Cole to Congresswoman Tsongas.
So we focused mainly on domestic issues, but Congress deals with plenty of sticky foreign policy situations. So what do you think is the best approach to dealing with Iran? And do you support the military option, keeping in mind the thousands of families, again, with ties to Devens and Hanscom, who have loved ones that could find themselves in harm's way?
Well, a nuclear Iran is not acceptable. It would destabilize the Middle East. It would lead to an arms race throughout that region of the world, and eventually would challenge us here at home. So a nuclear Iran is not acceptable. A military option can never be taken off the table. But we have put in place some of the most robust sanctions that are now looking to work. If we've seen the recent demonstrations on the streets of Iran in which Iranians are really feeling the economic squeeze as a result of them, it tells us that these sanctions are having an effect, and I believe we need to give them time to work. I don't think we should rush to war. I know from my experience with meeting so many of our soldiers, the strain of multiple deployments. We have an all-volunteer army. They've been asked to fight in 2 wars simultaneously for a good number of years. We see the evidence of post-traumatic stress disorder, the unique injuries that have come out of this war, too many young people returning with very serious physical injuries and mental injuries that they will struggle with our support for the rest of their lives. So we need to think thoughtfully about any effort to engage in war, but we cannot take the military option off the table in Iran, but have to remain very focused on sanctions and diplomatic efforts.
Mr. Golnik.
Thank you. There are a couple pieces to this question. The first piece is I think that we need to make a better effort to make sure that we're working in conjunction with the Israelis, the Israeli government. Israel, to me, is a beacon of hope in a very unstable region. Our relationship with the Israeli government right now and Prime Minister Netanyahu is at the lowest it's been since 1956. And I think that we need to work closely with them because certainly they're going to be the first responders. With regard to military intervention, that's a hypothetical. I wouldn't anticipate that having to happen. I do not think that sanctions work. I don't think sanctions work that often anyway. I think it enriches smugglers on the borders. So I will say this, we need to draw lines in the sand, red line, and we can include that with sanctions, but at the end of the day, if the Iranians were making nuclear fusion products for peaceful purposes, they wouldn't be doing it 5 floors below the ground in bunkers.
Congresswoman Tsongas.
Again, I think we've seen with these very robust sanctions that they are having an impact. We can tighten those sanctions, remain very engaged in diplomatic effort, but as I said, the military option cannot be taken off the table because a nuclear-armed Iran is not acceptable.
All right, we will now, and thank you, Mr. Campanini, for keeping us on track. We will now move to the next phase. And let me just outline briefly what will occur. It gets a little complicated, but we'll move through this rapidly. First, we're going to ask Mr. Golnik to ask a question of Congresswoman Tsongas, after which Congresswoman Tsongas will ask a question of Mr. Golnik, and then we will move on to to the closing with Congresswoman Tsongas going first, and then final closing statement by Mr. Golnik. So first question from Mr. Golnik to Congresswoman Tsongas.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Representative Tsongas. Representative Tsongas, you've supported the Affordable Care Act, which I believe has killed jobs, as business owners have indicated, including 2.3% medical device excise tax. You supported a stimulus package that added $1 trillion to our debt, was supposed to bring unemployment down below 6%. And until recently, we had been over 8% for 44 months and counting. President Obama says that his grade on job creation is incomplete. And when I was in school, an incomplete means to me you haven't done the job. So my question to you is, for 5 years you've been in office, you failed to support any type of programs in the private sector for job creation, sustainable job creation, and you have an incomplete too. So why should the voters believe you'll do anything different in another 2 years?
Thank you very much for that question. You know, when I went to Washington to make a difference. I understood the opportunity that exists in this position, in any elected position, to have an extraordinary impact on the people you represent and the country you serve. And I feel I've had great success. I did support the recovery package because I felt it was important to stop the free fall, that every action, in order to begin to really pull things together, we had to stop the free fall. And I think the numbers demonstrate that we have created and saved millions of jobs. But while we were doing that, I worked very hard on the ground. I talked about the companies that I worked with, because as much as it matters what you vote for, it matters what you do at home. So whether it was the company in Methuen that I talked about, or the 2 farms that wanted to put in solar arrays to save costs and be part of the future, or whether it was working with the city of Lowell or the city of Haverhill to make sure that economic development projects went forward there, we've had great success. I work with the small business community. They're the platforms for growth. We need to encourage them and support them, and they're going to create the jobs of the future all across this district and all across this country. I felt it was important to change the military. 15% of the military is female. 25% of it could be female by 2025. Women who serve should not be victimized by those they are serving with. We need to change the culture of the military. So while we need to talk about the really large problems we face, I voted for the Budget Control Act. A tough vote because extraordinary cuts across this country, but with discretion. We can make choices what we need to protect and what we need to cut because we no longer need it. Not a simple vote. And I voted for the largest tax cut in the history, one of the largest tax cuts in the history of this country in the stimulus package. And as a result of all those things, I think we are on a much better path, both for this country and in this most remarkable 3rd district.
And now you get to ask a question of Mr. Golnik.
John, I'd like to ask,
Let me fasten my seatbelt.
I want to know, and I think I know your answer.
Okay.
Do you support the Supreme Court ruling that allows super PACs to spend unlimited, undisclosed funds to influence elections?
I do support that, and I do believe, let me preface that by saying, look, a lot of people think that we need constitutional amendment for term limits. I don't believe we need that. I believe we need candidate finance reform. But Representative Tsongas, you yourself take money from unions, from Planned Parenthood, from Emily's List. It seems to me, and I haven't received any money from super PACs or PACs, to be quite honest with you, an occasional Republican town committee. I don't know if they're considered PACs, but thank you very much if you're here tonight. But I certainly believe that we need to level the playing field. By the way, you outspent me 7-1 last election, and that's not including money you received from third-party groups.
Well, actually, no super PACs have come into this election to support me. The contributions you're referring from Emily, for example, from Emily's List, I'm very proud to receive because I happen to be the first woman elected to Congress from Massachusetts in 25 years, and Emily's List is very focused on electing to women to Congress. I think it's important that our voices are represented. So I'm proud to receive those funds. There's a world of difference between a super PAC, which is anonymous entities pouring millions of dollars into a campaign, and Emily's List or Planned Parenthood making a legal contribution, all of which is disclosed very transparent. Both Elizabeth Warren and Scott Brown have rejected super PACs coming into Massachusetts, and I can't believe that now you're inviting them in.
I've invited anyone in. They haven't donated to my campaign.
Would you like to say that?
Again, I think we need to have a level playing field, Representative Tsongas. And again, I know you try to fundraise off of scaring people. Again, you like to do that. Scaring people that somehow I'm going to bring in all this super PAC money. I can guarantee you that for the large part, the money that I get is most of the money comes from in-state and it comes from small donations. So again, you don't need to worry about me. You've outspent me 7-1 in the last election, and again, not including those donations you received from outside groups.
Okay, now we're going to have closing statements. The schedule indicates that you'll have 2 minutes, but because we have some time, I'll give you 3 minutes each. And the first, by the toss of the coin, the first closing statement will be from Congresswoman Tsongas.
Well, I want to thank you, Dr. Esquino, for being such a good and fair-minded moderator, and thank the Lowell Sun and the Neshoba Valley Chamber, and as well as all of our panelists for a very interesting discussion. And also, it's been a joy being up there with you, John. As we close, I think I have deep roots in this district. They have been, I've lived or worked here almost all of my adult life. My father survived Pearl Harbor. I grew up on Air Force bases all over this country, and this part of the world is really the only home I've ever known. And I also know the opportunity one has in this office to make a difference. And as I've gone to Washington, that is what I have sought to do, to take the extraordinary opportunity and put it to work. So whether it's working in the military, and dealing with changing the culture around sexual assault, or lightening the load for our soldiers, whether it's working with veterans and making sure we expanded the GI Bill, continuing the legacy of Edith Norse Rogers, who was one of the original authors of the GI Bill and who held the seat for 35 years. Whether it's working on jobs, we could do it with working with small businesses, so important to this district. And we've had great success with that particular program I've talked about. We also have an opportunity with clean energy. We are home to one of the largest clusters of clean energy companies in this country. We need to take advantage of that and lead the way. And as I meet our seniors, I know how important it is that we protect Social Security and Medicare. We can make them stronger, but we do not need to fundamentally alter them in order that that promise is there for them. It's particularly important to women who live so long. And for homeowners, while we struggle with the policy level, in our office we have helped 800 homeowners save or refinance their homes. I think that's a remarkable contribution that so many on my staff have made. And as we talk about how we address our debt deficit, the issue of fairness is key. That is why I support extending the 98% of the Bush tax cuts for 98% of Americans, but have to say to those who've done so well, we need your help. We've got to let those tax cuts expire. So I ask for your vote. It's been my honor to be elected and to serve.
And Mr. John Golnik.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you, Dr. Esquino. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to Representative Tsongas. Thank you to the Lowell Sun. Thank you to the Neshoba Valley Chamber of Commerce. Thank you to Mr. Campanini, who kept sharp watch on the watch. We've heard a lot of facts and figures tonight, and Representative Tsongas likes to say that, the choice is clear, and I think the choice is clear. If you believe in the power of the government and an ever-growing government growing on our dime, then I'm not your guy. If you believe in the power of the individual and the belief that we can do better and that we need to do better, then I'm your guy. But let me just talk to you a little bit. I had a question asked to me a few months ago in Garden, and I said, what's this election all about? Tell me in one word. And I thought about it, and I said, well, unfortunately, this person doesn't know me very well. I can't do anything in one word. So I thought a little more, and I said, this election is about American exceptionalism. Now, what is American exceptionalism? To me, American exceptionalism is that no matter who you are, where you live, what your last name is, where you come from, that in this country, you can accomplish just about anything. You can run for Congress twice. Now, you know, maybe I'm a little bit of that American dream. I didn't come from a whole lot. I moved around a lot as a kid. My parents were both school teachers. My dad supplemented his income by being a Teamster, working on Chrysler's 8 Mile plan. Went to Central Florida public schools, which in the 1980s were not very good, but somehow managed to get myself into 3 good schools. Met my best friend along the way. Married her. Had 2 wonderful kids and decided to settle in Carlisle, Massachusetts. You know, and when I was a kid growing up, you know, I didn't get everything I wanted, but I always had everything that I needed. And when we talk about these things about American exceptionalism, about being able to do anything that you want to do if you put your mind to it and work hard. But how do we convey that exceptionalism from one generation to the next? Well, we try to leave the country just a little bit better than the way we found it, with more opportunity than we ourselves have had. And so I made that promise to my kids back in 2010, because this has been a continuous campaign for all intents and purposes, that I'm not going to be the first generation to sit by and make sure I hand this country off to them in worse shape than the way I found it. Absolutely not. Not on my watch. And that's what I'm telling people here tonight who have kids and grandkids. What's at risk here is American exceptionalism. You can't run up a $5 trillion debt load in 4 years and think that you're going to be okay. You can't run $1 trillion deficits 4 years straight and think you're going to be okay. The American public, people in this district, have been asked to do more with less, and yet the federal government doesn't. So I say it's time for a change. I say that if you're better off than you were 2 years ago, well then, I'm not your guy. But I think if the answer is that you're not better off than you were 2 years ago, and most of the people I talk to are not, then I would ask for your support, and I'd ask for your vote. Thank you very much.
Sentinel Enterprise, and the Associated Press, the panelists, Mr. Campanini, and most of all our candidates. Thank you very much.